All right, thank you everybody for being here. Today we're going to continue looking at the text from the liturgy, and we need to clean up a little bit the last couple of lines of the 7 practices of the Bodhisattva, and then getting into generating love and compassion. And these sessions are being recorded, so Bujo, I hope you're recording. And we will be transcribing these to generate a written text at some point that will be a resource for the community. So as I recall, we got into regretting and purifying all transgressions. I think that's as far as we got. We have a knowing nod. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so let's just, for the purposes of our conversation, I'll do a very, very, very brief and non-interactive summary of the first couple of lines just to orient us, all right? And then we'll pick up the next line. So the 7 practices of the Bodhisattva point out the fact that Bodhisattvas practice. A bodhisattva is not some perfected state that you just arrive at one day and finally all is well. It means that it's something that we practice and engage with on a continual basis. It's not practice in the sense of rehearsing so that one day you get it right. It's practice in the sense of one practices law, or one practices medicine, one practices the art. You engage in the thing, see. So bowing down in body, speech, and mind, there's a lot there. What does it really mean to authentically wield body, speech, and mind as a bodhisattva? We talked about offering the best we have to give, both real and imagined, to fill the space between us. And originally has the feeling of both the physical real and the imaginal as being of equal importance. The imaginal life, the practical physical life. For us human folk, we inhabit both worlds, whether we acknowledge it or not. Many people live inside horrible conspiracy fantasies, and that's where they live, and it's real in their life, right? Many of us live in stories that we didn't consciously take on, that we don't actually like or approve of, that don't really serve us in any way, and yet there they are, playing themselves out in our daily lives anyway. So the process of waking up has to do with realizing the physical, the practical, but also wielding the imaginal. Then, lastly, we got to regretting and purifying all transgressions. Unwritten there, but implied and a requisite is to understand what a transgression actually is. Being able to recognize unwholesome as unwholesome is not a given, not at all. There are many, many people, we have many times been in a situation where we take something that actually is not wholesome and not good for us and perceive it as though it is, engage it. And sometimes, even when the negative karma of that comes upon us, we tell a story so strong in our imaginations that we don't acknowledge the harm that we're doing to ourselves. Hopefully, we can catch on before it's too late. Some of us don't. Some of us die by our stories and our misperceptions, and it's a great tragedy. So what does it mean to actually recognize and realize what unwholesome action of body, speech, and mind is? And then the big thing is to actually regret that and say, this isn't good. This just isn't good. I'm not going to do this anymore. And then that's what purification means. Purification then is redirecting and changing, actually taking on body, speech, and mind in imaginal activities that actually are authentic and bring life to ourselves and to others. That's my quick 1, 2, 3. Sensei, do you want to do any summaries of those lines?
I think that is beautifully done, as it focus on the imaginal is like so important because honestly, as human beings, we mostly encounter our lives in our mind, in our thinking, in our way of perceiving. And basically what we're doing is we're creating another mythology, Buddha, the mythology of the Bodhisattva, the archetype of the Bodhisattva. Remember these young that really underscored how important archetypes are in our life.
Unfortunately, I think your mic wasn't on. And
Yes.
the women go unheard yet again for another generation. No, not now.
Okay.
Rewind.
Oh my gosh.
Where were we?
Yeah, somebody recorded that.
I don't think so.
No, but somebody took notes. What's that? Oh, the archetype of the Bodhisattva, yes. So basically you could say this is like the handbook, the 7 practices of the Bodhisattva. It's like the handbook for the Bodhisattva. What do we need to be able to do on our journey to enlightening others and ourselves? And then just one other point that I wanted to underscore is remembering just in general that like this discursive kind of learning is super, super important for our Dharma practice, precisely because it is educating our minds. And to remind ourselves that the 3 ways that we sort of take in the knowledge is that first we learn it, actually like let it sink in with a cup that's not dirty and doesn't have any holes in it, nice and clean. Not letting it go in one ear and out the other, or be in a dirty cup that's got other ideas other than our bodhisattva vow. And then the next is to analyze, and this is extremely important. We want to make sure that we've got the discursive, analytic, rational mind on board with our Dharma practice. So you really have to kind of test it and test it and test it over again. They say it's like gold. You have to put it through all kinds of experiments to make sure it's the real thing. And this is also really honoring the power of our own Buddha nature. We've already got it. We're just helping each other realize it. Analyzing is super, super important. So if you hear something and it's not sitting like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me, then you need to ask a lot of questions and you need to find your way to it making sense for your own heart, your own mind. And it's okay sometimes to like put it on the shelf and come back to it. It doesn't have to be fully resolved all the time.
At the first hearing.
Yeah. At the first hearing. In fact, it usually isn't fully resolved at the first hearing, I would say. And then finally, meditating on it. So meditating is actually making ourselves familiar with it. Having it so ingrained in our DNA that we naturally live out of it. And certainly inculcating it by saying the liturgy every day is a big part of that. And what should be happening is the liturgy and all the discursive work should be meeting the Zazen, and they should be unifying. So the Zazen is giving it the power, and also the liturgy is reinforcing the need for the Zazen.
There's also there's another gear, which is to contemplate these points, and this would mean to actually kind of ponder them and think about them and be with them in a contemplative way. And then it can be very interesting to actually use art and creativity to further investigate and express these points. This is an oft underlooked mode of spiritual inquiry. What would it mean to regret and purify all transgressions? Paint, express it, make a sculpture. Maybe search for an image. Take your phone out and see if you can find an image that expresses this. Engage with it in a creative way, this topic, this thought, basically attacking it from every angle, if you will. Understand it cognitively, have it in the depths of your sitting, in an unconscious way, but also contemplatively musing on it, studying it, reflecting on it, journaling. What specific transgressions actually apply to you? Like today, we all have them. Do you know what they are? I mean, knowing what they are is really helpful. The ones you have to worry about are the ones that you don't recognize because you don't see them doing their work, right? So poetry, art, music, interpretive dance. I mean, whatever it is, some creative way of actually engaging with the stories are great. If you were going to make a story about regretting and purifying transgressions, what would that story be? These can be very interesting and creative ways to continue to investigate and bring life to these Dharma teachings. So let's move forward then into the next sort of line, which is to rejoice in all virtues. Okay. So for my part on this line, I will say that it's implied but not stated that you have to first be able to recognize what the heck a virtue really is. And virtues, in some cases and settings, can be used as a bludgeon or a rod of punishment or control. It can be a word that has negative connotations, but actually, virtue in and of itself is a beautiful thing. It's like the qualities of true human authenticity, the qualities of the cosmos expressed as you, when everything is aligned and authentic and joyful and not hurting anyone or yourself, and actually bringing life to life. There's virtue. Sounds good to me. It's not just about like do the right thing and be a good little person who always does what they're told or anything like that, right? So recognizing what wholesome action of body, speech, and mind is, and not only recognizing it, but actually rejoicing in it, taking joy in doing the right thing. Like, if you woke up this morning not indicted for some major ethical violation, it's a good day. You have your integrity, right? I mean, no one's making a big news broadcast about you, but you wake up and there's no scandal today because you didn't do any dumbass thing. That's amazing. You have a freedom to enjoy your day that many people do not have, and perhaps you yourself have not had in days past. But to inhabit the space of, I actually have a clean conscience. I'm actually living in accord with the Dharma. Unfortunately, it's not a big flashy thing. I kind of wish it were. Sometimes it is, occasionally. You finally pass that damn koan or whatever, maybe a little bit. But actually, it's the subtle breathing freely, free of constraint of misdeeds. This is a joy that is such a treasure, and you can't buy that treasure. It's just beyond purchase, except by your own purity of body, mind, and speech. When you actually live authentically, do you know what I'm saying? Like it's a huge joy, and it's just undervalued. It's like there no newscast says, "Hey, Joey woke up today with a clean slate. Let's hear it, everyone." It doesn't happen like that, you know. But really, it ought to. Imagine if the news covered all the people without scandals and troubles and made heroes of them. Guess what? This loving couple woke up this morning and they still honor their commitment to each other. Everyone bow down. Why not do that? You know, this person faced a challenge and could have made a kind of octagonal maneuver that would have ended it quickly, but it would have been unethical. Guess what? They didn't do it. You didn't do it. You get to wake up that day and have the freedom of your integrity intact. This is massive. So it's not just like recognize the wholesome and be a goody two-shoes wholesome person. That's not what it says. That's not the feeling of it. The feeling of it is to be free in your life is to live with authenticity and virtue. See? And so it's something to be rejoiced in, joy. There's great joy in actually living authentically and not violating your own sense of right and wrong. It's way more beautiful and life-giving than any quick pleasure or advantage that non-virtue may offer. It's just a bad trade. Always was, always will be. So rejoice in the virtues, right? And the virtues themselves, we have them elucidated earlier in the invocation of the lineage: generosity, moral discipline, patience, joyful effort, concentration, wisdom, skillful means, unshakable vow, spiritual powers, and awakened awareness. These are not just virtues for the teachers to have that you gaze at longingly. Rather, they are yours. They're all of ours. It's inherent when we are upright and authentic. That's what it looks like. So may we appreciate, and not only appreciate, but rejoice, feel the true joy of being in ethical alignment with these virtues.
Yes. And there's a couple of bodhisattva strategies and tactics, which you should all take note of. The first one is to set our motivation. Like as soon as your eyes, you know you're awake, before your feet even hit the floor. For the sake of all beings, to bring all beings to full and complete Buddhahood, I enter into this day. And when you set that intention, all of the good works that you've done in the day are kind of put in that bank, so to speak, the Bodhisattva bank. And then remember that you want to also dedicate the merit, because that locks the vault. And the only thing that can drain that merit is anger, full on "Rah!" And that anger also comes from jealousy. And this particular practice is looking straight into the eyes of jealousy. So not only do we rejoice in our own virtues, but we rejoice in the virtues of others. So anytime you see anyone having some good stuff happening in their life, I'm so happy for you. I'm rejoicing in your good luck, in your virtue. And of course, we know as a bodhisattva that, I don't know if this is true or not, but I still love it, and I want to believe it's true, so we're going to make it true for bodhisattvas. Rinpoche used to say, if you rejoice in the merit of others, you get half of the merit. So you would say,
Incentive.
So it's sort of armchair merit making, Oh, I love that happened to you. How wonderful, how wonderful. Yes.
Even more.
Even more, yes. It's merit all around. And of course, what it's doing is it's cutting the jealousy, right? And the jealousy and the miserliness is what keeps us from actualizing, realizing our Buddhahood. Because the bodhisattvas are always working on behalf of others, right? This is sort of a lovely closed-loop system when you get inside of it.
It's a happy food chain.
It is a happy food chain.
It's in reverse.
Yeah, it's a happy food chain.
Yeah, I'd like to add, too, that like an untrained person will more readily identify with the suffering and the pain.
Yes.
And I think that's because our brains have evolved to scan the environment for things that can go wrong. What can be dangerous, what can be harmful. Ouch, that hurt, I don't want to do that. And so that's people can relate to that. Hoshi and I were talking about this some evening ago. But when a person trains in the bodhisattva path and they learn to kind of unclench the egoic hold on the mind and vice versa, then we begin to actually have our own joy be authentic, and we can readily recognize that in others, and that becomes stronger and then not just scanning your environment for pain or fear, but actually seeing the beauty. Not a naive beauty, not the beauty of someone who doesn't realize the dangers. There are dangers. But also recognizing the beauty of yourself and of life and of this whole mystery that we're engaged in. Right? Should probably, for safety, just leave that on.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. At least I know. There'll come another brilliant thing you say that will not be recorded.
Sometimes I have this image of us as bodhisattvas doing our work here, but in other realms, there are other bodhisattvas doing the same work. And it's just this one voice of awakening, bellowing throughout space and time. It's nice to be able to feel the continuity of realms and how they're all connected. I think it was easier to do that during the medieval times. Now we're a little bit flat. Talk about flat earth, right? But nevertheless, Dharma practice reinserts it into our postmodern life. And I believe that this practice is actually is what heals this postmodern mind that's been so flatlined by scientific materialism. And the more that we practice, and the more that we tenderize our hearts and clarify our minds, we really begin to tap into that.
I think too that like the images from the James Webb telescope, they express the bodhisattva life to me. You see these huge structures that the eye couldn't possibly see, but there they are, and it's the universe, these stars birthing the next generation of stars, flinging their guts to the cosmos. It's just astonishing, really. It's I hope someday that these things aren't so contrasted to each other or unnecessarily so, because there's some just beautiful things that we can see through our science, and I'm a fan, but it all expresses the same reality. When you really see your own true nature, you see that your true nature and the nature of anything in that James Webb image, or the little nano microscope thing, it's the same nature. It's exactly the same nature. It's all you. So here we are now in this realm. So, any conversation or questions or anything about this business about rejoicing in virtues? If so, yeah, thank you. If we could thank you. Oh, it's nice that thing stopped. Whatever that was. A leaf blower. Yeah.
Does it work? Is that me? No, it's you. Gotcha.
And the delusions continue.
Yes, so when you were talking about how virtue frees you, some people I know who are like try to bend the rules a lot and make excuses for bad behavior, who are close and dear to me, I find are always living in suspicion of other people. And I think that's partly what you're free from when you are practicing virtue, is that when you live in that space, you're less likely to anticipate bad behavior from other people that isn't really forthcoming. And then you don't impute motives to people that aren't really there. And then you don't make up these delusional stories about why they looked at you funny.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, I get that. I do. It's like, no, I think you said it perfectly, and it's true. It's a real burden. You know, if you know that you're cutting corners and telling yourself stories and your motives really aren't good, you know that. And if you're okay with it, so's everyone else. And so that's what you see everywhere, you know. And that's why whatever little gain or advantage comes from such tactics, it's a horrible trade, because now you live in a world filled with suspicion. Virtue doesn't make you naive, thankfully. It's you know, eyes are open. People can do bad things, and it's best to be aware of that. But there's this real truth that the way you perceive the world has everything to do with how you perceive yourself. And so if when we cultivate authenticity, even if it's ridiculously humble and very modest and quite simple, actually that's the best. That's actually the best. It's not dependent on shiny things or impressive things or sparkly things. I like all those things, they're fun, but I mean that can't be why it's working. It works because you feel the joy of simplicity and honesty, you know, and that's just such a wonderful thing. And then you see it everywhere. You see it in the leaves. You see it in the sky and the clouds, and then you meet another person and, you know, yeah, I can see the beauty in them, you know. But eyes are still open. But well said, yeah.
So the other thing that comes to mind is that actually Zazen is the great purifier of character. I mean, just think about, like, you know, you're on the cushion and you want to get up, or you're having, like, whatever, you're in some kind of karmic thought storm. It's like when you see yourself trying to wheel and deal with yourself, right?
There you are trying to, like, negotiate. With who, you know?
we all know exactly what we're talking about. We've all been there, right? But there's something about making us sort of stay with the practice that we have, and just wait until the bell rings, right? And somehow that sort of fidelity to practice, and also fidelity to each other, because we know if we start squiggling around and we start like whatever shucking and jiving, the whole ship's going to start going over, right? This is what purifies our character.
Yeah, and it's really subtle, like to really begin to take custody of one's, I like that, what you said, karmic thought storm.
Yeah.
To really recognize that and just like, no, I'm not playing with it. Yeah. Like for real, I'm really not playing with that. It might be raging all the less, but I'm not playing with it. I'm in my practice, whatever that is. That is a ridiculously powerful thing to be able to do, And again, it's not like anybody can look at you and see what's going on there. You could fake it, but just don't. Like really express and experience authentic virtue at every breath. Because you find that you can. It's actually it's your natural state, honestly. I think being yanked around by all this stuff is quite unnatural. We just need to like shake it off.
Yes.
Any other comments, please, Jukai? Yeah.
I find that people judge that character in you. They see that change in how you interact in the world, and there is a judgment. I was told recently that my smile was inauthentic. It wasn't real because it was too big. So I was smiling too big in photos, so it couldn't be real. And
Lutheran friends?
This was my father's wisdom. But I think, perception of practicing too much or doing too much, or that virtue that even if you feel joy in it, others see it and judge it and say it's too much or it can't be real.
Yeah. They would have my sympathy and pity and sorrow. I mean, because, I don't know exactly who we're talking about or what the setting is, but it is true that when you start to actually realize the fruits of practice and your wisdom and your compassion and your equanimity and your creativity are not a joke, it's incredibly threatening to people because you seem to be like not playing by the rules. Like this is how we're good little boys and girls, and this is what we do, right?
No,
and
it's
like
the samsaric ego rules.
yes, but with others though, when I'm talking about another person, it's like it can't be right because it's got to be like this. And that to me, like in broad strokes, then I'm interacting with a person that's using an external structure for safety, and maybe it's served them well at some points. Maybe there are times when we're dealing with a crisis or some trauma or something, and having the external guardrails is really useful. There are some people, for example, that are bottoming out with an addiction issue, and they come to some very fundamentalist, hardcore religion of any kind, and it works for them for a time. Everything's like no, and they snap to, and they're in this community where everybody's agreeing, and it can work for a while. They successfully, let us say, they stop drinking or whatever their issue is, but then they can never really outgrow the external structure because, if I leave this structure, then maybe I'll relapse. And so they become very militant about it, and they need to see it in other people, particularly if they care about your opinion. Like if they actually value you and care about what you think, and you're not behaving in those ways, then you're very threatening to their sense of who they are in the world and what the world is supposed to be. So, for example, there are some people that feel that either you're in a gang or you're in the church, and it's a binary. And if you're not in the church, you're in the gang. And we need to be in the church, because this is the only place that we have control. This is an African American church experience. You know, when they came up here from the Great Migration, the black churches were the only institutions they could actually own and control. Everything else was white dominant. So generationally, there's a sense that either you're in or you're out, you know? And so it's incredibly challenging culturally for people in that community to start finding happiness and joy outside of that narrow definition. It's very threatening to the people that use that as a way of like being in the world, you know? So what I found is if they're people that I care about and that love me and I love them and it's confusing for them, then I just say I love them. And I just, over time, their suspicion may erode. It may not. but I'm certainly not going to sour down just so Aunt Ethel can feel better about herself. I mean, sorry, you know. I remember one time there was a relative of mine who will go unnamed, and we were at a family gathering or something, and this person, she said, Jay, we love you, but you need to shave that beard. Because it wasn't what a man is supposed to do in her worldview. I don't know how that arrived, but that's true, right? And I just looked at her and said, you know, I love you. And I just left the rest hanging. And I didn't need to respond to it at all. And I just had a beautiful smile, and she hated it. But, you know, happily, you know, some decades have gone by or whatever, and we were at a family gathering, and I saw the same person, and we just smiled and said how much we loved seeing each other again. And whether or not her beardly concerns have been ameliorated, it just was not the issue of the moment, you know. But it took time. And that happened, by the way, when we first moved back from Boston. So I had been gone for a while, and they want to make sure I snap back in line, because I've been off with the Eastern wilds for a while, you know. So I don't know if that's relevant to what you're saying. Anything you want to respond to?
I will say, though, you know, if somebody says, oh, I don't believe you, what are you doing? That's all fake. I do take a moment to just check in, you know, is that really true?
And then we say, no.
Could never be.
No, that's a good point, though. Actually, it's a good point to bow down and actually wonder. It's a good chance for self-inquiry, but I did not go and shave that day. Or any day since. Although I might, so. Yeah. Any other comments? Please, and May. Always a delight.
I just wanted to reassure Doan about do you really get half the merit? Kaishan and I used to teach a marriage prep course, and there was this article that had social studies, like they've been doing, you know, real like science on this for many years. And it's true, when you take joy in someone else's good experience, whatever it is, that person gets to relive it a bit, right? They get more joy out of it by telling you about it, or, you know, whatever it is. You get the joy vicariously of learning more about it and kind of visualizing it, and you kind of get to experience it. And it's sustenance for the relationship. It nourishes that relationship. And so there is new merit there that is beyond the merit that was generated by whatever the original event was. So you don't have to wish it, it's true.
Good.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's great.
Yay.
Kaishan had a visual.
It just helps me understand why she seems so happy and interested when I'm telling her about the recent chess game that I won or something. She's generating merit for the family.
I want to make space for our Zoom folk. Is there any Zoomly responses or anything? Let's see.
I have something I was kind of wondering about. This is Shugen. As I was hearing Jukai talk, and then hearing what the teachers have been saying about virtue, the image or the concept or the framework that kind of comes to mind is that the virtue kind of emerges from seeing things and acknowledging things and taking things exactly as they are. And when we start to run into situations of, well, I think your smile is fake, or I think your beard is wrong, it almost seems like now we're getting into a realm of we're not interacting with that person so much as they are, but we're interacting with what they think should be happening. So now we're starting to interact with their delusions, and that's where delusions is maybe a strong word for it, but we're interacting with what they think they are seeing or feeling or whatever the case may be. And I'm wondering if that may be where some of this confusion comes from.
Yeah, Shugen, it's nice to interact with you. I would say that that's a piece of it. Like that can be the case. I don't think that's always the case, but it definitely, there's a lot of the times when the personality that you're actually interacting with is an amalgamation of coping mechanisms and karmic knots. It's not the person's authentic expression. It's a twisted and kind of brutalized version. And so not only is the personality structure that you're interacting with coming from a difficult place, but what they see in the world is necessarily a reflection of their own perception, their own mind. So beings that are trapped in such states are worthy of great compassion. I mean, that's a horrible, horrible place to be. And so, yeah, when people are thinking that things need to fit the way that they ought to be in their minds and they don't, assuming that they're not coming from a place of wisdom, okay, Manjushri picks and chooses. He has the sword of judgment. So there is a time and place for having that clarity. But in general, if someone is like looking at another person and saying, oh, you need to be this way or you need to be that way, they're probably saying that to themselves a hell of a lot. Okay, Shugen, thank you. Nice to connect with you, man. Please, Kiketsu.
Hi. I was thinking too, as I've listened to everybody's sort of accounts of can you hear me okay? Okay, is it quiet? Okay. Can you
I think
hear
it's
me?
yeah, it's
Yes,
okay. It's a little.
Okay, sorry. Everybody lean forward. I've been listening to everybody's accounts of sort of what other people in their lives have as this reaction to the joy that we're uncovering here. And I've noticed that in the beginning, I would start to couch it with, sorry, not to go all Buddhist about this, or I learned this at the temple, and immediately the reaction would be different. But if I just kind of went into it and I said, oh, lately this is what I've been noticing about the world, then it's like they can sort of fit that into their own paradigms and they accept that virtue and they accept that joy and they can contribute to it as well, rather than get immediately defensive or like, oh, well, that's just fake or made up or you're in a cult. Or had any number of reactions. So I just, that's just a comment. I don't have any questions. That's all.
Yeah. So smart on your part. Generally, like, you know, I've noticed this a few times with people in the Sangha, like we get acculturated to certain words and certain ideas. And when somebody from the Sangha is interacting with, like, the muggles outside,
The outsiders, yes. The uninstructed worldlings. Yes.
It doesn't translate and people get very weirded out. So the best course of action that I think we've found is like when dealing with people who aren't necessarily like, you know, Buddhist or even Buddhist inspired.
Buddhist adjacent.
Yeah, Buddhist adjacent. To just kind of like say the thing, but don't say where it came from.
I think too, you know, it's important to be able to, at the moment where it's appropriate, show up with the right language and the right comportment and the right attire and the right sense of space. And it's also important to recognize when that changes. So in other words, being able to wield the forms and the language and not being attached to the forms and the language, right? So like the way that we interact in Dokusan, depending what we're working with, is not what I would expect people doing around the dinner table. The way that we wear robes during high ceremonies is not what we do when we're having a Sangha hangout, you know? And so, yeah, being able to be relatable. You know, if you try to import a bunch of Buddhist-sounding words onto your friends who have no idea what you're talking about, it's odd, you know. So, yeah, we want to know how to be formal when it's time to be formal, know how to be totally chill when it's time to be chill, but be authentic in all places. Some people are very naturally inclined towards the lingo and the formalism, and some people are naturally inclined towards a kind of chronic casualness that will never sit up straight, just out of spite. And so we want to know how to actually meet the moment right. When you chill, chill. When you sit up straight, sit up straight. When we're talking Dharma with colleagues, know the right way to say things. The language actually matters. When you're talking to friends, just speak in the normal way that you speak, but speak truth everywhere. Anyone else? Kensei and then Suju? Yeah.
It used to be really hard for me to share joy. Like I didn't want to make anybody feel bad.
Hard for you to?
It used to be hard for me to share joy with people, to express joy.
I see.
You know, when I was younger, because I didn't want anyone to feel bad.
Yeah.
This great thing happened, but not to you. Which is like so bizarre to me now. Like it's such a weird way to think. And so like messed up. And I just like rejoicing in your virtues it's also a gift to other people to share your joy, like to be open and to, when you're having joy, to be that joy and to let other people be the joy with you. And it's such a different way of living and being. I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that because I have so much joy, and being open with it I don't know. It's so, I'm not even saying anything, am I? I'm just.
No, I get it. Yeah. I mean, really, you know, the thing is too, there are some cultures where like, if you get too happy, oh, no. You invite wrath of the gods. Like really, like it's, you know, it's okay to be medium happy in spots, but don't you get too joyous because the volcano will hit or something, you know. And like Japan is very much like that, as I'm told, that its traditional attitude is you shouldn't get don't let your sadness bleed all over everybody, but don't let your happiness attract the wrath of the kami. Just keep it squished, honey, you know. And so, okay, that's one culture, you know. But the reality is that, you know, for you to walk around the world, in the world that you live in, the universe that you've created and you inhabit, the mandala that is yours, to radiate joy, beaming through all gloom, is like the best thing you can do. Even if things are not going well or the way you like, being authentically virtuous in your contact with the reality of it is just an immense gift, you know. And I feel there's something happening with all the social media where there's this heightened sense of calamity and tragedy at our fingertips, the doom scrolling phenomenon, you know. But then there's also this parallel, like, kind of false beauty, this false or superficial kind of sensuality or beauty or whatever it is, you know. It's kind of missing it on both sides. Like the honest, everyday, simple joy, the unbearable exquisiteness of being able to see a leaf fall and to breathe. You know, it's just not represented. It's either a horror show or it's porn. You know, it's like, what's going on here? Where's just being joyful enough in being able to be alive and to breathe and to have friends and to lead a life of love? That is the cosmic golden ticket. That is it, you know. And so allowing that to shine is just a gift to everybody. It really is.
You know, it's so interesting as you say that, because I just think of like Sesshin is all about it, right? I mean, talk about like, well, how do you live just an ordinary, simple life every day and find the joy and the beauty in that? Well, I mean, that's what we're practicing. We're practicing like, okay, breath in this moment.
Yeah.
This train going down the track, you know?
Yeah, it is interesting because even, you know, even if, no matter what, when you come to Sesshin, you set those things to the side and you just, it gets very simple. So let's, we've been going for about an hour. Let's take a little bit of a break, fluids in, fluids out, and then we'll press on. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, so we got through one. How many words? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words.
Of the summary of the previous. Did we do this last time? Generating love and compassion is today's topic. You were going to quickly do a non-interactive summary of the 7 practices.
We didn't get through the whole 7 practices last time.
You
roll over like the last 4.
Yeah, that's where we
like
are.
when
We're
they're
trying
little
to pick up
and
from there.
there's no expectation of like
Generating love might just be 2 months to get to. I don't know.
and then as soon as they
You
start
have our
moving in
compassion,
terms of
but that's
like
okay.
formative behavior, all of it, right? All of it's just like
So if this was going to be transcribed, is this going to be like a multi-volume set when we get done, or?
It probably should be.
whatever it is, right? And I think sometimes like when we feel self-conscious about being joyful about something that's making us happy, we might be too flexible.
Hi, Liz. Welcome.
What it means in terms of our status or our security or our ability.
I wonder if the temple muted us. Maybe they did.
I can still hear you.
Okay, good. I like how it was your wife who messaged me and said, The raise your hand feature is a great way to get the teacher's attention.
We'll sit cross-legged for a while. Yeah. That's what I do during session.
All right, so we are returning here. Well, that's interesting. There's a computer screen on the Zoom. What did she say? I sense a presence behind me. It's a dark force. It has the glow of the moon, however. Thank you, Kaishan. Okay, Bujo, are we recording? Excellent, excellent. All right, thank you, everybody. So, continuing on with our conversation of the 7 practices of the Bodhisattva. So, rejoicing in all virtues, right? Yeah, Suju, something else to contribute? Thank you.
Is this still on? Yes, okay. Before we left the virtue aspect, I was looking at the Avatamsaka Sutra that we were using last week, and most of it seems pretty clear to me, but it says, and whatever the virtue of beings everywhere, hearers, I don't know if that's a typo or not, hearers, saints, self-conquerors, enlightening beings, and Buddhas, in all that I do rejoice. And I think the thing about self-conquerors is like really beautiful, and enlightening beings, and the other stuff seems kind of like, nothing surprising. But hearers, I'm wondering if they're talking about like deep listeners or...
Hearing, sounds. It's an issue, right? It's a real thing. I mean, one way to understand it that's easy is that, someone who hears the Dharma. Those who hear the Dharma, either proclaimed in words or hear it in reality itself. When reality speaks, what do you hear? And better than that, how do you get out of just you hearing it? So a hearer is a serious thing. So there's a lot of ways to understand what it means, but easy way to understand it, hearers of the Dharma, folks who have heard the Dharma. The Avatamsaka Sutra is really amongst my favorite texts. It's just massive, so I don't hold that against it, but it's a bit ponderous, the whole thing. But it's so imaginative, and it inhabits such a vast cosmology. There are worlds within worlds within worlds, and universes and realms, and when you enter into it, it just becomes this massive ecology of awakening that is cosmic, that is just wonderful. And it's just one of the best sutras I know of that helps to evoke that. The Lotus Sutra goes there. Lankavatara, not so much. But anyway, hearers, those who hear the Dharma. It is said that when a realm exists where the Dharma is not being proclaimed, it's gone, and then a Buddha will arise in that realm eventually when the causes and conditions are ripe, and then the Buddha of that age will rediscover the same Dharma that's always been there, and then they have to be asked. So there's always this motif of the like in our case, Brahma, the sort of over-God character, comes down and asks the newly realized Buddha to teach. There's something like this in every case where the Buddha will realize that the Dharma, they will be asked to teach, and then they'll begin expressing the Dharma. And those that are able to be in the presence of such a one are then hearers of the Dharma. And once you've heard the Dharma, there's a change in your karmic trajectory. So this is considered to be really, really essential. Does that make sense? Good. Any other concluding thoughts on virtue? Beautiful. All right, so let's look at let's sally forth here. So I regret and purify all transgressions. I rejoice in all virtues. And then this one, I request you to remain until total enlightenment. Okay. When I read these words, I hear the expression of the enlightening being asking the enlightened being to stay and to be willing to continue to be accessible in some form. Interestingly, we were just discussing a realm in which the Dharma had disappeared. And so this request that the living manifestation or the insentient manifestation or simply the reality of Dharma itself to remain. So when I hear these words, it evokes in me the feeling of not taking for granted that my teacher and the lineage is something that I have access to. I want to rejoice in the fact that there's a way for me to get connected. I rejoice in the fact that Myoen Roshi remained and put up with me, literally put up with me, and guided me and was willing to allow his practice to be accessible to me, which is really all that a teacher does. They practice and they allow the student to interact with it and to encounter it. It's not really like they teach you. I mean, kind of in spots, but not really. The real thing is that their practice is accessible. You can access their practice, and you can get to play in the band with them, even when you don't deserve to, or you're not really ready for it, but nonetheless, come be in the band, and you have access this way. So, requesting to remain until total enlightenment. And this is pointing to the fact that, we are not forever and ever infants in the Dharma. In a sense, we are, but in another sense, you grow up. You can realize your full, authentic self. That ceremony, I mean, this is all ritually visible when it comes to an actual transmission, but in the Inca ceremony, which is the final seal, if you recall, that's a public ceremony. The Denkai and the Denbo are not, but the Inca, which is the final seal, that's a public ceremony. Everybody sees exactly what happens. And the most salient feature of it, there's a sharing of a cup of water, one taste, and then there's the bowing of the zagus. And so what happens is the teacher and student zagus go right together. And they both, what do? They both bow to the Sangha together. And then when the person rises up, then now the Inca has occurred. So it's in this expression of service, right? And then from that moment on, then according to my teacher, then he and I are peers, but of course, he's way my senior, by some goodly stretch. But the way he's very adamant about it, it's like, no, we're peers. And so from his end, I think that's I'm grateful to hear that. And from my end, I still see him very much as my senior. But what that expresses is that there can come a time when your eye and the eye of the lineage are the same eye. And I wish to emphasize that this does not only apply to people for whom fate has in store an Inka Shome ceremony. That's not true. That's a visible expression of it that's only real use, honestly, is to empower people to be able to help others in a very specific way. That's why it's even there, I think. But our own practice of awakening actually is our own realization of that total enlightenment. And at that point, whether there's a public ceremony or not, there is an acknowledgement that awakening has occurred and that it's Buddha meeting Buddha. See? So this is very much, to me, when I read it, it's expressing, requesting the teacher to remain accessible until I myself, in my realization, is equal to the teacher.
Yes.
And then you can still be friends.
Yes. So when I say this limb of the 7 practices, am I right?
You're on.
Okay. Okay. When I say this limb of the 7 practices, I think about all the people that have left me and abandoned me and have just gone out of my life, and maybe the people that I too have just abandoned and left. And I think about like all of the impermanence of life and the fragility of life. And I'm asking the Buddhas, and I'm asking Rinzin to please stay. And they know, well, I know eventually Rinzin will have to die, but I'm pretty confident he's not going anywhere until he does. But also my own Buddha nature, like faith in my own Buddha nature, to stay, the discipline to practice to stay, this is a really big limb, actually, because it's really addressing head-on that fragility of relationship. And there's something about dharmic relationship, especially between student and teacher, or student and disciple and teacher, that has this really strong tensile strength. And I think when we say this limb, we're just reinforcing that we know that it's fragile, and at the same time, it's incredibly strong. But it's only strong if the teacher stays, if the Buddha nature in us is alive.
You know, it's interesting too, because I feel like the modern kind of version of being a Dharma teacher is quite absent of this intelligence, because it's about pithy articles and book sales and workshops, but it's not about actual lifetime relationship in community over time with real accountability. You know, we live together. You know, I mean, we're rubbing elbows for decades. You know what I mean? We get to know each other, up, down, sideways, all the ways. You know, and that's, I think that's a necessary ingredient. We don't literally have to be monks living in the same bunk room forever. For times you do, in spots, but this long-term fidelity to that relationship, I think, has always been integral. And I think it's only in the modern era that Dharma teachers can be looked at as anything other than that. So like being a Dharma rock star is not a good thing. It's not a good thing. It's not good for the Dharma, in my opinion. It's not good for that teacher, in my opinion, and it sure as hell is not good for their students, in my view. Like, again, we'll see. 100 years from now, maybe I'm proven wrong, but I don't think so. So the ones that I really trust are the boring root vegetables. They just plant, they're in the garden, they got deep roots, and they're boom, you know, and those are the teachers that I really respect. I mean, it's nice to be known. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I mean, James Roshi has got a ton of books out there. He's very well known. He has articles, you know, but he's also, he's there for me. Ever since I met him, the day I met him, we locked eyes. There was a sense. Within a session or two, it was clarified, and he still takes my call. Do you know what I'm saying? And like there's a way in which this has been integral. The Buddha himself spent some 40 years teaching, and he had students that was with him for a very long time, and he continued to be accessible in this way. So this business about remain.
I think too about that story about the Buddha getting really mad at everybody and saying he was going to stop teaching.
I like that one.
He's had enough.
Yeah, I like that. It's the Buddha quit. I think I've told the story a lot. I mean, everybody's heard it, right? So I don't need to repeat it here, but it's very humanizing, the whole thing, you know. I trust a scripture that has something like that in it. The Buddha told you all to fuck off. All right. That prompts a question. Excellent. Yes. Virtue. What do you? Okay. Yes.
I think that two things. One is that had I known how much I would be seen in that relationship, I might have been scared by it and not started it. And the other is that in most traditions, the relationship isn't like that with the teachers or the clergy, and so it's very unfamiliar to be seen and to wrap your mind around that kind of commitment that that you all make to each of us and to the Sangha. It's really quite incomprehensible, and to take that in as a new person coming to the temple, to hear these words and to experience them over time and have it be seen so differently is really powerful, and very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, a lot of religious traditions, the clergy, first of all, it's a separable role from being a teacher. There's the priest, there's the rabbi. They're not necessarily the same thing. Correct me if I'm missing that, but there's a functionary in the Western traditions of what a priest is that can be filled by anybody. And that's true in the Soto sect as well. I mean, you know, if you've got a Soto funeral that needs to be done, anyone who's got the training can go ahead and do it, and it just matters that it's done. You know, like having the funeral mass, it's always the same mass. It doesn't really matter who does it, it's just that someone who's ordained does it. So it's very institutionally oriented, right? It's nice if you have some relationship to the person, but it's not even necessarily a value. That's, you know, when those things work, they work because people find solace in the stability of the institution. For people for whom that works, that's what it's working for. They like the fact that it's all the same for everybody, and it was this way, it always has, quote, been this way, always, quote, will be. Okay, but in the Zen tradition, you know, we do have priesthood, we do have officiating and ceremonies and stuff, but the teacher role is actually quite separable from that. Many Zen teachers are not ordained. Aiken Roshi never ordained. This just wasn't a thing. It's not necessary. So, but the teacher now, this is an apprenticeship. This is an apprenticeship model. This is not an institutional model. No one's getting a degree from here. Not even the seminarians. They don't come away with a degree per se. They come away with an ordination, but the process to getting that ordination is not clipping through credits. You know what I mean? It's not this predictable thing. It's a relational apprenticeship through time. And so that's why we say student and teacher or disciple, teacher and disciple. Disciple is when someone's far enough in that they can start to help take on some of the teaching role, with a derivative authority. I mean, they're that far cooked that can happen. And we'll see more of those in time, I'm confident. But that model is very different from the Western educational model. The Western educational model is institutional. So I have my degree from the New England Conservatory, and that's the thing. And then, yes, I studied with this one and I studied with that one, but they're teachers, they're faculty of that institution. And my degree is not from that teacher. My degree is from the institution. And we don't even think about that. But in Zen, I don't have a degree in Zen studies from any place. I hear they exist now. They might be pretty cool for all I know. I don't actually. Daijaku Sensei runs a program that I think is very compelling looking, but it doesn't result in transmission. So I think I had a little bit of a heads up on that in terms of martial arts. Like my teacher, Bill Sensei, Aikido is very much a direct relationship with the teacher over time. I learned a lot from him. I continue to. And then my real teachers in jazz actually were not just within the confines of the institution. Charlie Bonakis put up with the institution. They begged him to allow them to grant credit for his teaching. And he said, okay, but I'm not going into town. So I had to go to him. But my point is that it's not completely alien to our culture, but it's not front and center.
I'd just like to speak a little bit more to that being seen.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because all of our root teachers have just seen us so nakedly and so rawly. I think about Bill Sensei in Aikido. I mean, he touched you and he threw you and he knew exactly who you were. And every once in a while he'd come up and he'd grab you, and within half a second he'd go, or
More likely that. More likely that.
I remember one time I made a sword cut in front of who was the big teacher in Florida?
Satomi
Sensei. I made a sword cut, and he walked by and he went, "Ooh, oh." I'll never forget that. It was I felt seen. But that was one of those, one of the nods for 10,000, no, right? And also because we've sort of gone through the grindstone of being seen by our teachers decade after decade after decade, whatever the full panoply of our experience. It's we're here for you and we're fine with being seen, right? Mm-hmm. And there's something too, I think, energetically about that's actually it's almost like the lineage of being seen and seeing, right? So because we're okay with being seen, that's now being transmitted to you, okay with being seen, and then you pass it on to others. Isn't that cool?
I think too, it weaves in with virtue, because part of why it's okay to be seen is that you're actually in wholesome relationship to life,
Right.
And when you mess up, and you will, let's just be clear on this, it's not like you're just purely correct forever and therefore it's okay. It's not like that. You will fart inappropriately, you will say the wrong thing, you will make mistakes. There's no surprises with this, but it's authentically recognizing that regret, transforming it, and moving on. That's where everything works, using all the ingredients of your life. Now, everything is wind in the sails. It just requires authenticity, see? And so that seeing yourself, seeing others, being willing to be seen, one ends up feeling that the cosmos itself in some way sees you. And in some real way, you see the cosmos, and you can bow to each other and realize the non-separation. And then you live in an alive world that is quite friendly.
And also I think about Sangha too, right? It's like we're seeing each other, like for real. And how wonderful to get to show up for each other in this authentic way. I mean, so many people say to me like, wow, in the Sangha, I feel so good, but it's kind of weird that I can actually show up as myself and everybody likes me. So that's really, really cool.
This line we're working on, that I request you to remain until total enlightenment, it washes over me. I have a flavor of it. I've heard you say that the you might be the enlightened part of myself, that the you might be the virtues, that the and I'm happy to keep it ambiguous. I don't know if this, does this text have an origin in Pali? Is this a translation? And I'm happy just to kind of leave it, but I do wonder, since we're talking about it, the you, and even if that remains ambiguous, the remain until total enlightenment is always interesting to me. Mm-hmm. So whatever that is, the virtue, the awakened self, until total enlightenment, is that when I realize being one with the universe, and the universe is one with me, that I no longer need that it's transcended that. Why wouldn't I still?
Well, I see this, I mean, to just say it baldly, it's like, I request you to remain. I request you to remain. Okay, so there's an I, thou, as Buber would say, right? There's an I, thou happening, and that's real. You can't skip past that or just kind of poetry it away. You have to realize, I need the teacher to stay and to be willing to be interactive with me, right? So there is an I, thou in that first chunk until total enlightenment. Now, the dualistic mind will say, oh, at that point, then they go away and I'm still here because I don't need them. But that's not total enlightenment view. That's still very much a separate view, right? So remain until total enlightenment. You can take it, and I do, take it at full face value in the dualistic sense of, please continue to be available to guide my practice, which is what comes next. But also, in some sense, you could say, until total enlightenment, because at that time the I, thou collapses. And there is no I, thou. There's no remaining, there's no coming, there's no going. So from that perspective, there's no you, there's no remaining.
So I would also say with that, this is like a very ancient prayer. So back in the day, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas were everywhere, right? Arising from the cracks of the earth, the cosmic sense of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas just working on our behalf in all these different realms. So it would be that, you know, you requested the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas to remain. And if you do like white Tara practice or any kind of visualization practice, that takes on a different color or a shade that's very interesting, if you want to work with that. And until total enlightenment means until I become a Buddha. Once I am a Buddha, you know, I'm a Buddha. I'm good. Now I'm working for everybody else, you know, with unconditional love and unconditional compassion and prajna wisdom.
I think in a way, I mean, you hope as a parent that one day your kids don't need you. Hopefully. It'd be great. And then you can be friends in a different way. You know, the parent-child relationship can turn into something more or different, you know. So there's something in there about it, like until total enlightenment, you know. Doesn't mean they disappear on you, but they're there in a different way then.
Yeah, contrast that to, like, you know, in Christianity, Jesus' enlightenment is not reproducible, right? He's the only one that gets to be enlightened. Oh, I'm getting a nod. It's a head shake. Do you beg to differ?
So, fascinating subject. I don't know if we want to get into.
No, I'd like to hear her comment.
Okay, well then, so I'll finish my. So
Yeah.
I request you, myself request you, the teacher, or my small self request my big self, whatever. To like, thanks for being here until I don't need you. That's kind of how I can hear it when I say it.
Yeah, it's like, you know, please support and care for me until I no longer need the support and care, and I can support and care for others.
Nice. All right. Here,
Then we
now
join hands as friends.
Now I'll face my fears of us getting into theology.
Maybe I should clarify what it is I'm addressing before I go off on a tangent. You just want me to go, or do you,
What
do you
is,
want to?
I'm lost. What are we talking about?
I don't know. She was.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
Well, you're saying that only
I would say that Jesus isn't even considered to be enlightened or awakened. He's just part of the Trinity, and you're not. I mean, I think even saying Jesus is enlightened is kind of a projection. I don't think normative Christians would walk around saying Jesus was enlightened.
Okay.
Well, I guess that's what I'm asking. Are you equating the term enlightenment with like the resurrection experience, or the, you know?
No.
Well, so that's okay. That's what I'm asking. What are you addressing there then?
I am in him. He is in me. We are together. The Father and the Son are united.
Right.
I think if I can interject, I mean, in Christianity, and of course it's a broad thing, and we're not really here to, you know, parse differences there, but Jesus is the Savior. And that's a role that only Jesus holds. He is sacrificial for the sins of the world. He is unique in that way. He's the Savior. And that is an incredibly one-off gig. Nobody else has that role. And in the same way, Muhammad is the seal of the prophets. There are no prophets after him. He's the final seal of the prophets. It's a singular gig. Nobody else has that gig. Peace be upon him. Him, not you. You know, you know. So in Zen, particularly, every single one of us is equal to Buddha without any distinction. We just have to realize it. So that's, I think, what you're trying to point to. Is that right?
My minister has spoken well.
But, you know, honestly, if you read the Sufis, well, you know, Rumi, that's okay, that's a different view. And if you get into the mystics, if you get in John of the Cross or Teresa of Avila or Merton, you're way off into a different, that's not normative expression of the tradition. That's a mystic's view, which is obviously going to be much more aligned with where we are, because it is. There are esoteric traditions within Christianity that recognize the so-called the unitive path. But practically speaking, that's like less than 1% of folks who would self-identify as Christians even know about that, let alone practice it. But it's there. It is there.
I think I'm going to think before I say that line again.
Might be a good idea. Takes a little bit of a root canal to work through it, but yes, we're good. Just hold still, honey. Hold still.
Okay.
Different track.
Thank you.
I get the sense, and I don't know if it's completely accurate, that this line is also reminding us of our commitment and responsibility to stay with the practice.
I think you're absolutely right. It's a two-way remaining, the great remaining. You know, it's everybody's fidelity to the gig. You know. Exactly. So well said. I mean, we haven't said that yet, and it's right in there, isn't it?
Yeah. It's sort of like, no matter how badly I behave or what I throw up there, please stay with me. Right?
Yeah, and you know, sometimes the answer is no. That can happen. You know, even in the Buddhist time, there are certain recordings in the sutras where he wouldn't teach certain people or a certain person because certain karmic causes and conditions were knotted in such a way that it wasn't the right thing to do. So it does have to be taken care of, very much so. Like even the relationship between parent and child can go so far south that it's destroyed. And sometimes that's authentic. So, you know, careful. Take care. Actually take care. That's all. Now, if we continue, the next line says, I request you to remain until total enlightenment. And then we have, I request wise and compassionate guidance. And here, I think it just spells it out. It's not just remain. It is remain. It is be accessible to me. Allow me to be in your presence. Please see me. Please allow me to see you. This kind of feeling. But it also is explicitly requesting wisdom and compassion and guidance, teaching. All right? Kaishan, yeah?
This is actually the question I've been kind of sitting on. I've been looking at each of these things as very discrete sort of things. Mm-hmm. And then I get to these 2 points, and it seems like we have that saying in Zen is like one corner is lifted, all corners are understood. Yeah. And I was trying to see these 2 things as discrete points, and it didn't make sense to see it that way. Like it just kept hitting me as, well, obviously, I like the beard, I like the food, but that's not really why I want you guys to, you know, continue to be available to me. All right.
Yeah. No, I get you. Yeah. It's request. I mean, so in this case, you know, again, it's talking about the teacher and the teaching role and the student role and this, and, you know, not merely put up with me and see me, but actually with wisdom and compassion guide my practice. You know, we say in our Shoken covenant that the teacher's job is to practice and the student's job is to practice with the guidance of the teacher. This is explicitly the same thing in different language, you know. So it's with wisdom, which in Buddhism is a very specific thing. It doesn't mean just like skillful or crafty. It means based in ultimate reality, understanding of true nature, right? Experience with true nature, not just understanding it. Understanding will fail you eventually. Experience, realizing, actualizing true nature, and compassionate. Goodwill, wishing the best for me. this kind of guidance I request. So I actually ask for full contact wisdom, tempered by lots of compassion, please, but guide, help. Please help.
Well, remember the two wings of Buddhahood, wisdom and compassion, right? So that's kind of the full package. Also, I think inside of this limb is, please teach me in a way that I can hear and that I can receive. And that is part of the skill of the teacher, because in case you didn't know, you all are completely different in the way you...
I've sure noticed.
Yeah. So, especially like when we're doing Doksan, like over multiple days, it's like you all come in front of us, this very unique package. So we have extra help in relating with you directly so that you can understand what we're saying and receive what we're saying. It's actually kind of very magical, believe it or not.
And it's interesting. I mean, this is a direct, transmission to us through the Lam Rim teachings with Gelik Rinpoche, and that Galupa lineage has a lot of academic clarity and wisdom. Like kind of like this kind of thing we're doing now, actually talking about and elucidating the Dharma. But also in our Zen way, in our Zen tradition, there's a lot of emphasis on this individual Doksan meeting with the teacher. Take your mind, bring it to the Zen master, let it be seen, receive their guidance, this kind of merging, this kind of direct, tailored guidance. So at once, all of us, our natures are precisely the same. There really is no difference. And at the same time, as Sensei is saying, everybody's completely different. And what is useful for one might very well not be useful for another. And there is Kensho. There is letting go of Kensho. These are true, right? So wielding both of these is a skill set. And there are some teachers that are really good for a very narrow bandwidth of people, like monks. They're really good at working with young male monks. That's they can do, or whatever the situation is. But it's one of the things that I see in my teacher, Myoen Roshi, and also I would say with Myotai Sensei and Daido Roshi, all of those folks. They have and had a capacity to actually meet people exactly where they were. This is a very common thread. How they did that meeting was influenced by their own mind stream and their own karmic histories and personalities and stuff like this. But with all of those folks, there's always has been, in my experience anyway, this sense of complete meeting. Just this complete meeting every time. Even when it's, a difficult meeting or an unpleasant one or challenging, or just kind of neutral, nothing's really happening. It's just kind of like everything's just kind of cooking along, but there's no big pops or problems. It's just kind of ordinary time. Like that's important too. It's not always these fireworks, and it's not always these terrible tragedies. Most of the time is plateau kind of space where things are digesting, Learn to love the plateaus and really appreciate them. You'll spend most of your time there. But this complete presence and meeting.
Yeah, and I think about all the different ways people hear no or yes, or and just from the teaching side, how's this going to be delivered? One person can hear it one way, another person can hear it another way, and you're saying the exact same thing, and it's
that's confusing.
Yeah, there's a lot of skill, a lot of the lineage is really present. for me, at least in those times, like really relying on the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas to deliver.
So any comments on this business? Oh, please, Joe.
So when you think about, when I think about people who are in the teaching role, especially in the Dokusan room, but even in the wider interactions within the Sangha and how you show up for people, it really fascinates me that you have a kind of core solidity that keeps you from like veering off into soaking up the space the other person is in. You know, because when you are interacting with people, it's possible to sort of go where they're at and be who they are, and not necessarily a performative way, but just showing only that part of yourself. So I'm interested in how have you ever had to like wrestle with that, or does that just automatically come over time with your own Zen practice, that you just are really very clear about who you are and where you are at the center, and so those tendencies don't really arise for you? Does the question make sense?
I think so. Let's see.
Can you repeat the question?
Let me just respond, and let's see if I can close.
Okay.
So when I was first starting to teach, I was much more movable by what was in front of me. So if there's a catastrophe or an epiphany or what have you, it would more likely affect my sense of where I was, and it would stick with me longer, right? And the more experiences I've gotten, obviously, there are patterns. There are things that's like, oh, it's this one. I see. Here we are, and it's easier to just understand. Oh, this is actually not just the process I went through, but as a student, but this is the process we all go through as practitioners, and I have a deep and profound trust in that process. That at first I only knew from my own experiences side. So I go through the process and I have that to draw on, but it's a singular experience, right? Then over and over, I see the same process occurring with the folks that we're all practicing together in different bodies, in different shapes, in different situations. It's the same process happening. And then over, I don't know, a decade or two or three, however long it's been, it's like, okay, this actually is really reliable. And so for the student who's going through this anew, it's all very new and strange and disorienting, or clear as a bell and lovely, or whatever it is, but it's your own singular experience through the path. Now, having done this as long as I have, and hopefully will continue for a long time, I can see the patterns much more quickly, and I know that it's going to work out. If the person stays true and works through the stuff, then it'll be fine. Does that make sense? So it's just haven't been around a while. But on the other hand, there is a way in which I always felt that my teachers were able to completely meet where I was, but at the times when it mattered, they were able to have a kind of a helpful clarity and a distance from it, from which they could offer, I don't want to just say advice, but they could reflect for me clearly what was going on, because they obviously had a much broader and deeper experience that they were expressing for me. So what would the Dharma say about this tizzy I'm in? Because I am in a tizzy, but what does the Dharma itself say to it? It's different from what James would say. You know, when Myoen Roshi responds, it's the Dharma itself speaking. So there's a way in which that doesn't really get touched by things. Like the sky, I always say, you know, the sky isn't marred by the weather patterns. So our own awakened nature really isn't touched by anything else. They're a living human embodiment of that at times, right? And there's been times in my life where I desperately needed that, and I'm lucky enough that I was able to connect with it. Because, you know, as a young 20-something, I think the world's ending because I messed up my gig or whatever silly thing I was concerned with. But to my little life at that time, that was the world. And I could bring that little world into the presence of the cosmos itself. And the cosmos said, "You're fine." I'm like, "Oh, I'm fine." And actually, it's fine. Does it make sense? Yeah. So.
Well put.
Anything else to add to that, or?
Well put.
Okay, there we are. Thank you. That's a good question, a good prompt. I think I would like to say, too, it's occurring to me to say that not everyone that has awakening experiences or even transmission can necessarily do that role very well. There are people that are clear as a bell, and they're maybe very thoughtful and heartfelt people, but that relational thing is just kind of not in their skill set, honestly. And that's okay. They're not lesser or in any way. It's just a different manifestation. You know, they're out there gardening, and the whole cosmos is just lined up around the dance of their garden. And it's not lesser than, it's less obvious. It's less visible in some ways, but it's no lesser by any measure. Just to say it. Any other points on this? All right. So then finally we land the plane by I dedicate my merit for the sake of all beings. Happily, I suspect we're all old hands at this by now, but just to say these things, when you conclude anything at the temple, like a meeting or a service or whatever, there's always embedded in there someplace a dedication of merit. And that's not accidental, and it's not just cultural hangover. It's a very specific, meaningful practice, and it is a practice to dedicate the merit. So knowing how to dedicate the merit is actually a skill. If you have a wonderful meal, you might very well just inhale, if you're like me, yum, and then move on to the next thing, mindlessly. And this is less of an experience than it could be. If you enjoy the meal, and then you even dimly remember that there are starving people on this planet. There are people that are dying of hunger right now. There are people who can no longer taste because they're intubated and they can't eat solid food. There are beings in the hungry ghost realm who cannot actually take in the nourishment they so intensely desire, right? So if you can even just call to mind the fact that there are other beings that suffer in a way in which you can take the merit of what you've just done and dedicate it to them, literally and imaginatively, that this act matters, this skill of being able to dedicate the merit to those who do not enjoy the privilege of whatever it is that just happened is an incredibly powerful magic. It transforms the way you perceive your experience over time. And you can actually become like a conduit for love in this way. Everything that you do can be fully enjoyed. This is not, notice, this is not an ascetic path. We're not saying, oh, bad senses, punish them, betray them, suppress them, just, see nothing but gray and eat nothing but oatmeal and just, it's not like that. Actually enjoy the beauty of nature, the incredible space we have to practice in together, our friendships with each other, all the tastes that are enjoyable. Don't do harm to yourself, but remember to dedicate that merit. See, and what to for the sake of all beings. All beings. And some versions of this have all sentient beings, but all beings makes the most sense to me, because even the insentient also are beings. There's a kind of a life to a rock. There's a life to a planet or a system, a sun, a solar system. There's a life to a galaxy. There's a life to a molecule of water. It probably isn't conscious in the way we are, I don't think. But actually dedicating to all beings, sentient or insentient. But we do know that sentient beings are the ones that can suffer more blatantly, so they get first dibs. Go on.
Well, I just love the way this last line just really segues us beautifully into generating love and compassion. Because we've dedicated our merit for all beings, and then we're very clear about how we want to help relieve the suffering of all beings as bodhisattvas.
I mean, if you look at the logic of it, the way it's set up.
Yeah, that's really good.
We start with the Gatha of Atonement, which is necessary every time. There's always reasons for that. So the Gatha of Atonement, and then we take refuge in a very sort of Pali Nikaya kind of way. And then we have a grounding in the 5 remembrances: growing old, ill health, death, nature of change, deeds, and then this business of precious human life, rarely encountered, easily lost. Now that I have life and opportunity, may I practice the Dharma wholeheartedly. And that sets us up into the Mahayana refuge, which has a very different quality to it, It's the same refuge, but it's a different feeling tone, for sure. So, compassionate spirit of love, bringing great joy to all suffering beings, actualizing the great way. This is a further evolution of understanding and refuge. And then we invoke the lineage. We call them to be with us. We give thanks for the teachers and the lineage of teachers, offerings, qualities of the awakened mind. We invoke them. We ask for their years of life to be lengthened, and may their vows actually work, especially as they pertain to ourselves, perhaps. And may I cultivate these perfections with their guidance. And then we get down to the business of practicing for the first time as a bodhisattva in the presence of the lineage. So I bow down in body, speech, and mind to the lineage, as well as to our own life. Offer the best I have to give, right, to fill the space between us. Who's that talking to? It's talking to the lineage that you just invoked, right? In front of the lineage, I regret and purify all transgressions, rejoice in virtues, request the lineage to remain until total enlightenment, request their wise and compassionate guidance. And then all of this is then dedicated for the sake of all beings throughout space and time. Something?
I just think it's brilliant.
And then, as Doan said, that leads us off into generating love and compassion for all beings, and that becomes the next focus.
Did you say that this chant came from the Tibetan Lan Rim?
This chunk, the Mahayana refuge, invocation of the lineage, and 7 practices in that order from the Galupa Tibetan lineage, the Lamrim,
Lamrim.
and the generating love and compassion as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other queries, please? I'm sorry, if we could. Yeah, and then here.
I'm just curious about the use of the word merit. Why is it I dedicate my merit, I guess, in this specific context? How would you define merit?
That's a good question. Traditionally, when someone ordains into the Sangha, this is like early stuff, okay? One of the things that happens is they become a field of merit, so that a lay person can offer them food, which is what you offer them, and in return for that, the lay person gets merit, which is kind of like, bonus points. You kind of level up. It's good karma, something like this. But it is kind of an accounting system in a way. It's an ancient mind that has this idea that this merit needs to offset folly and karmic troubles and stuff. And there's a way in which that's completely true, I think. But as things evolve, it's not only the ordained Sangha that provide a field of merit. They do, and that needs to be respected and understood. When I go to my teacher, who is also my priest, and I can help them and take care of them, there is a kind of a bonus to that. I don't know how to describe it. That the effect of that is magnified because they're an awakened person. But anyway, but it's not just the ordained folks or the awakened folks that actually are fields of merit. The fact is, you too can generate merit by the good actions that you do and being noble and magnanimous in the world and so on. But what you don't want to do, and this is counter to the abacus mind, is you do not want to hoard merit. You completely counter to that. You don't want to be in the space where you're trying to get all the merit points so that you can level up and transcend the game and finally win. That's a little bit the early version, primitive Buddhism, we might say, is about you need to get enough merit that you can become awakened and be free from this realm, right? The Mahayana turning says, no. I'm not leaving until all beings are free from suffering. As long as space and time exist and beings continue to suffer, will I return and be of use. So what am I going to do with all this merit? I'm going to dedicate it to those that need it. So it's this way of actually unhooking from any kind of hoarding of reward, any kind of power that I'm getting from it. You dedicate that away immediately. So you're not clinging to anything. You're not clutching to anything. There's a kind of a funny story. You remember Phil?
Yeah. Coleman.
Yeah. He was a disciple of Myotai Sensei and Daido Roshi before. And then, so we were colleagues, peers, in studying with her. And he, very interesting, very short Brooklyn Jewish guy. He was such a character, this guy.
Yeah.
His name should have been Sal or something, but it wasn't. Anyway, he was just a great guy. And he went traveling to, I think it was Thailand that he went. And so, you go to you're in Thailand, you're going to go to the Buddhist Temple, of course. So he goes, wow, and what you do is there are vendors there, okay? As he told the story to me, there are vendors and there's the monks. And you go to the vendor and you buy these little prepackaged monk goodie bags, medium, small, or large. And you buy it from the vendor, and it's got all the things, the tasty treats that the monks like or whatever they need, toothpaste, this kind of stuff. But you buy the appropriate set of thing, and then it gets you a very specific amount of merit. And then you walk the bag over, and then like some monk is there, and you give them the bag, and then they thank you and they chant at you. And that's where you get your merit for this. And so you'll see this transactional relationship. It's thousands of years old. It's quite beautiful in many ways. It's indigenous to their community's way of relating. So although that might sound like there's a lot of shadow to it, it keeps the lay people and the monks in communion together. If the monks don't relate to the villagers, they don't eat. Okay, so that ceased to be true in northeastern India at a time when it became under the patronage of the royalty, and the monks lost touch with the villages over a few hundred years, and they were like off in the peaks studying the esoteric things, and the villagers didn't even relate to them anymore. And it's the Dharma's accessibility to the people just really was cut off at the knees. So it's actually quite beautiful. So anyway, you buy your goodie bag and you give it to the monk, and the monk chants at you, and there's an exchange of merit, and it's nice. Well, Phil goes. So he's doing all right. So he buys the big goodie bag, and he goes over and he gives it to the monk, and the monk says, "Oh, I'll give you the merit." And Phil says, "Oh, no, I don't want the merit." And the monk's like, "Huh?" He's like, "I don't want the merit. No, give it to someone else who needs it. Just give it to someone else." And the monk went, it turned pale, and suddenly these conversations start happening to the monks back and forth in Pali or whatever they're talking, Thai, whatever. And they say, "You not take merit?" And Phil's like, "No, I don't want merit. You give it to someone who needs it more than me. You stay here." So Phil's like, should I run? The monk went out and came back out. The abbot came out. "What is this I hear? You don't want the merit of your gift?" And Phil's like, "No, I've told you, I dedicate the merit to other beings that need it more than me." And the abbot goes, "Psh," and he says something, and suddenly everything stops. And Phil's like, "What's going to happen?" They had this huge honor. They grabbed him, they took him back into the cloister, they put a kesa on him. They had some recognition that this was an advanced being who was amongst them, and they paraded him around. It's pretty amazing, right? And he when he tells the story, he would get very choked up about it, actually.
Yeah,
but
it was very meaningful for him.
it was very meaningful for him, but the fact that someone would dedicate the merit, that was like, whoa. That was a cosmically significant decision that this person was making. And it was honored. It was like he had some, I forget there was a term. We have a vertebrate amongst us, quickly. So it's like that. For us, this is what we do. But if you really get the radical nature of it, to not be worried about my own salvation in heaven. Give whatever salvation I have, whatever grace, give it to those that need it more than me. I'm going to stay here and help. Right? That's intense. So this is something of dedicating the merit. Interestingly, Phil received transmission and came into his own for too short a time, and then he passed some years ago, and it's nice to remember him now.
It's nice. It's bringing back his face and his vibe. Thank you.
Well, at least you guys get the merit of his trip.
Nice.
Sure. Yeah.
The other thing I would say about merit is so merit is kind of like blessing, which is kind of like having your mind turned towards awakening, towards Buddhahood. That's sort of the ultimate merit, right? And when we've made the Bodhisattva vow, to be the best bodhisattva we possibly can be means that we're constantly giving this blessing to everyone. Yeah, something like that. In fact, we increase our bodhisattvic capacities by giving it away. And then, immediately should be hearing in the back of your mind, oh, what about those paramitas? The first one is generosity. Yeah. So it all kind of weaves together. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Please, Jukai, yeah.
A life lesson for me right now, it seems to be about saying no. And I think that in incorporating, dedicating the merit, that when I first came to the temple, I struggled to think about activism and like that being fierce and not angry. Mm-hmm. And I struggled to see how that voice, that fight fit with practice. Yeah. And over time, I've struggled to see how saying no fits with practice. And there's a way that being able to say no and also dedicate the merit of that is a really powerful practice. And that feels harder to learn than saying yes. Does that make sense?
I hear you, I mean, yesterday or the day before, I think yesterday, there was a committee, which will go nameless, that, found itself having an issue. And my perception was that the committee wants me to just decide everything. And I said, no, I'm not going to decide. Y'all agree or don't, but y'all work it out. So there was a practice of actually saying no, like I'm not going to answer. Of course, I had my impulses about what the answer should be, but that's not the point. So there are times when, and then happily, the committee worked through things, and I think we have a better situation than probably what I would have come up with anyway. But the ability to actually withhold is as important as the ability to step up. We have to be able to step in, we have to be able to step back. If we never step back and say no, then other people never grow into their own power. And also we get depleted. We'll just get crushed. Part of my saying no is I had a really scheduled day. I had a wedding gig to play, which I don't play anymore, but I said yes for a friend, and then I had a rehearsal and had classes, blah, blah, blah. So it's also practical. Like if I try to take all this on, I'm going to get sick. Like my immune system's just going to be too bombed out to be functional. And then I've made a disservice to my body. I've made a disservice to being able to be present for these teachings today. You know what I mean? So that ability to say no and to say yes, it's not like one's wrong and one's right. They can both be wrong. They can both be correct. We have to have the wisdom to be able to be authentic and to recognize wholesome no as distinct from unwholesome no. And we have to recognize wholesome yes from unwholesome yes. And then trust the process. Trust the process. One of my learnings has been that, decades ago, if Doan and I didn't do it, it didn't happen in the Sangha. And then we've had to learn that not only is that's just not possible now. There's way too much going on in the Sangha for any one person to completely be doing it all. But in order for us to get to this place, I'll speak for myself, I have had to learn how to not do everything. Or better said, give up the fantasy that I could. You know what I'm saying? So there's times for growth, and it's like that as a parent, you know? There's times when you just want to solve everything for the kiddo, and there's times when that's not really the best thing to do for the kiddo or for you. The healthy thing is to say, no, do your own laundry, or whatever it is.
Interestingly, in the paramita on joyful effort, the last few pages of that chapter are on what's called relinquishment, which means at some point you have to say no because you're too tired or you can't do it. And that's actually, that discernment is actually part of the paramita of joyful effort.
It was an addendum. They got years later. I'm going to add this piece.
No, I think it was probably hard won. They realized, oh man, you just can't keep on going.
Yeah. Any other conversation around this? Okay. You know, it leads handsomely into this business of generating love and compassion. And I would just like to say visually, if you look at the page, it's about right? If you look at the page, you've got refuge, invoking the lineage, the practice of the Buddha, all the stuff about teachers and all that. It takes up about as much language as generating love. Generating love takes up that much space. And compassion, do you know what I'm saying? It's like really important. Like if all that stuff before it is working, how do you know? Because there's compassion and love. That's how you know this is all working. If you invoke the lineage and blah, 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 and bow down and all this, and you have no love and compassion, you missed it. It ain't happening yet, right? The way that you can tell and what it looks like when it's mature or when it's maturing even is an increasing capacity of love and compassion and an increasing awareness of that, not as some sentimentality, not just an emotional like fragility or something, but actual power, the actual power of love, the power of compassion, the ability to actually manifest it no matter what, to be compassionate anyway. This is an amazing expression of and fruition to the training. So, seeing that we have 10 minutes left in our time together, I'm going to say that that'll be the topic for our next, and then the Heart Sutra shall be the following. But let's just read this together once as a conclusion to our time today. Generating love and compassion. May all sentient beings be free from clinging and hatred, being close to some and distant from others. How wonderful it would be. May this be accomplished. I will free them from clinging and hatred. Bless me to accomplish this. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. How wonderful it would be. May this be accomplished. I bring them happiness and the causes of happiness. Bless me to accomplish this. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. How wonderful it would be. May this be accomplished. I will free them from suffering and the causes of suffering. Bless me to accomplish this. May all sentient beings have the joy that has never known suffering. May they be free from clinging, hatred, jealousy, miserliness, doubt, pride, wrong view, ignorance, and dualistic thoughts. How wonderful it would be. May this be accomplished. I will bring them to this state. Bless me to accomplish this. Let's have a dedication of merit. Reverend Kaishan, if you would.
We dedicate. We dedicate the merit of our time today to all those who do not have access to these teachings, to those who recognize that they are stuck in suffering and lack the practices that we have studied today to help free them from these bonds. May we help these beings all to reach full and complete enlightenment in this lifetime and take them all there together without exception. May it be so.
May it be so. Thank you very much, everybody. And a special thank you to Bujo back in the AV room, making the Zoom world go. Yeah, and everybody on Zoom, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
If folks could help restore the Zinda for tomorrow, that would be great. Thank you.